Hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. Well, what else would be on the agenda on any given week? Trade, tariffs, what will Donald Trump do or say or think next? And we have first ministers meeting with each other, with the Prime Minister, with Indigenous groups to see what it means now that Bill C-5, the mega project bill, is in place, and will it really make a difference? And so we have assembled our panel of really, really smart people to take a look at the issues of the day and, some surprise issues, because I do want to know what you think about giving 16-year-olds the vote. But let's get to that in a moment. Margaret McCuaig-Johnston is with us, an expert on Canada-China relations, a senior fellow at the University of Ottawa. Heather Exner-Pirot, Senior Fellow and Director of Energy, Natural Resources and Environment at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And Admiral Mark Norman, Defense Strategist, was the Vice Chief of the Defense Staff after 40 years of service to his country. Welcome to you all. Great to see you. How's your summer going?
I've moved houses, so I've been between renos and packing, and so exciting summer.
And we found you in Seattle, where it's who knows what time it is, but it's early. The sun is up. However, we see the sun is up. Mark, how about you? What have you been up to?
Great. Lots of cycling, golfing, and had some interesting visits to the West Coast a week or so ago, talking to some investment people about defense industries, but that's a whole other topic.
Oh, good. Okay, we might come back to that about where we're going to get all our new defense equipment if we're not going to get it from the United States. Margaret, what about you?
Quiet summer, visiting friends and receiving guests here, and and catching up on reading, and always things going on China. So
yeah,
I'm happy to have a summer where I can just sit on the deck and relax.
I am doing the same. I'm here at beautiful Fishing Lake. It's a quiet, dull day today. Yesterday it looked like the Atlantic Ocean. Today it looks like a skating rink. It's so pure, but you know what? It just is time to rethink. So anyway, let's dive in. So the first ministers are meeting again. This is getting to be quite a regular get together. Saskatoon now in Muskoka, and the premiers amongst themselves signing deals. But again, Daniel Smith saying, Heather, that it's all well and good to have this legislation that allows the Prime Minister to, blow past all the rules and just approve mega projects. But as long as you've got Bill 69 and tanker bans and clean fuel standards, it's hard to imagine that we can get the stuff out of the ground to either put in a pipeline or put on some new transportation system across the country. What's your take on where we sit today?
Yeah, well, exactly. I think C5 was a good start, gave a good indication to investors, proponents that the government is serious, wants to see things move, but it's very much unfinished business. And if people recall, Premier Smith gave a list, I think it was 7 or 8 demands, a couple of months ago. I saw her at the Global Energy Show. Peter Mansbridge said, "Are these all, demands?" She said, "Peter, this is my short list." It's true that, people, these 7 demands, but when you look at them, these are very reasonable, requests, and the laws and the policies behind them were actually quite, atrocious, and in most cases, I would argue, unconstitutional. And it's pretty close to the list that the oil and gas CEOs twice have given out in March and I think April. 38 oil and gas CEOs saying we cannot invest when we have these, so the emissions cap, the oil tanker ban, the Impact Assessment Act without reforms, and I think the language has softened from repeal to reform on that one. The Greenwashing Amendment, which is, to free speech. These are all quite bad laws. The plastics, ban, which has already been found by a federal court to be unconstitutional.
Correct.
So again, the point is, you could, with C5 make a pipeline or make a railroad. But you can't fill the pipeline, you can't, build a mine to put on the railroad. What is the point? So we're only halfway there.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that these provinces, and I'll just stay with you for a minute, Heather, but they're signing these agreements and these MOUs. But to your point, they need federal sign off on this stuff in terms of getting a pipeline. If you're going to have to go through Quebec, eventually at some point, Ottawa's going to have to say to Quebec and use its superior powers, we're actually coming through your province, or to BC, we're actually going to the coast. And it's not, or to Indigenous groups for that matter. It's not clear that Carney, the Prime Minister, is up for that fight.
Well, and I hope he is. You know what? With the ask for most proponents in most provinces to get out of the way. It's
Yeah.
not to do things; it's to stop doing things. And so the problem everyone has
Stop
to be,
helping.
yeah,
Stop helping.
the problem that people have with IEA or C69, as we used to call it, is that it is federal overreach into provincial jurisdictions. Supreme Court of Canada has already found that.
Yeah.
They made some small amendments. Alberta does not accept them. Again, with Saskatchewan, Ontario is already in the process of reappealing those legislations. So there are some things the federal government has to do, in terms of approving an interprovincial pipeline, for example, or a port, or the approvals and the permitting around those kinds of things. But in terms of the emissions tag, the tanker ban, all those things, like just get rid of your bad policy so that we can do the things that we want to do in the provinces in terms of non-renewable resources and electricity.
Mark, I see you nodding your head through a lot of this, and it does seem to be, to Heather's point, like, get out of the way, all of these wonderful things you're talking about. So let us get on with it.
Yeah, and I mean this I think is part of the problem going forward. We have to reconcile what I would characterize as some very constructive and positive language.
Yeah.
If we take them for their merit, some good indications of a desire to change the way we do business, but fundamentally, the structures and processes that have been put in place over the preceding decades are the obstacles to moving forward. And not to get into too much detail, but I had the pleasure of participating in a institutional investment discussion a week or so ago on the West Coast. And, the focus was on defense industry, but it was quite interesting to hear the people who were trying to move large amounts of capital around, and they were looking for investment opportunity. And they came up to me and said, we've seen the exact same problems in the mining industry and the resource industry. The problems are structural. And what's fascinating to me is that there is, in fact, a desire in the private sector to try and move on some of these things, but they're not going to take unconstrained risk, and they're looking at the layers of government. And in this case, as Heather had said, the federal government in particular, to show some real leadership as opposed to rhetorical leadership. And I'm still optimistic, but if we don't get out of our own way, we're going to have a lot of problems. And this, to me, is just one of several systemic issues that we're trying to reconcile as a country in order to go forward and really sort ourselves out.
I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago on the podcast with your former colleague, Tom Lawson, who's carrying on with his interest in this. And just, it's the same kind of thing. It's why can't you spend the money in the Defense Department that you're given? Well, it's the procurement process. It's the rules and regulations about who you can hire, about government imposing its social objectives on buying a tank or a new piece of equipment. And we just seem to be strangling ourselves.
Right, and regulatory compliance on a variety of issues, especially as Heather's referring to. So,
Yeah.
I am still optimistic. I say that, but boy, oh boy, I think, to be quite honest, I think we have to start breaking some stuff, and maybe pick a few things that are examples of how we're going to do business differently. Because if we don't, the intransigence will just sort of carry the day, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the other thing we're seeing, of course, is the flight of capital out of this country for exactly that reason, which is you're making it too damn impossible and complicated for us to invest. Margaret, just your take on all this issue.
Yeah, well, I think the thing I've been focused on is the Prime Minister's serious, I think, intent to have economic partnership with the Indigenous groups on these major projects, and I think that's really important. One thing we have to remember is that a lot of these treaties provide for the sole use of the land for the Indigenous people. And so we need meaningful engagement, we need advanced consultation, and we need respect. And what we've seen so far in this, I think it's gotten off to a faulty start here because things like, a major meeting with 600 Indigenous people with the Prime Minister and Cabinet, they weren't consulted at all on the agenda. And, it's little things like that and bigger things as well that are giving them pause. There are really good discussions going on things like the roads to the road to the Ring of Fire. But, that's an area where there's sole use for Indigenous people. So we need their engagement, and it has to be respectful and meaningful.
But they're already talking, Margaret, about going to court on this, about
Yes.
asking the Prime Minister to slow it down when everybody else is saying speed it up. There's kind of a different set of objectives from the get-go.
Yeah, well, we have heard the Prime Minister's commitment to build big fast.
Yeah.
And to a lot of the Indigenous groups, it means bulldoze us. And so, yes, they're going to court. I think they're looking for clarification, and they're looking for parameters to respect their treaties at the same time as providing economic partnership. And we have members of the Supreme Court who are very supportive of Indigenous objectives. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens. I don't think the intent is simply to slow things down, but I think they do need a meaningful role.
Heather, I want to come back to you because I know we have thoughts on this, because at the core of this is also people saying consultation discussions, and maybe the feds haven't handled it all that well. But the fundamental question is, do the Indigenous groups actually have a veto on this, or do they just need and should and want to be consulted?
Yeah, and Margaret, I'm not sure that the treaties say they have sole use of land.
Yeah.
I think the treaties are about sharing the land. But it's unfortunate that we've lost momentum, because before the election, I would say there was really good momentum between Indigenous industry relations. We've seen several big equity deals passed. It was a new model. People were excited about it. And industry has just gotten a lot better, and so have their Indigenous partners in the last 20 years of finding ways to do business. And this narrative, a little bit, if you ask me, has been hijacked a little bit by the AFN. And when we say, they're blocking the bill, they want to seek an injunction on the bill, that's a particular group of 9 First Nations in Ontario, and when there are over 600 First Nations in the country, so it's not all First Nations. And we are at risk of the narrative being dominated by those who are against. But I do know also for a fact that there were a lot of projects that had strong Indigenous involvement in their development that looked like they were going to have equity deals, probably will still have equity deals. And there are smart Indigenous groups, and what an opportunity for them right now. If they come forward with a good project with a proponent, those will be prioritized. Those will go to the top. So I feel like, obviously Carney could have done better. Ford could have done better with their respective C5s. Things have looked a little derailed. But in the background are still all those good projects that have been doing work for the last couple of years that will still be good projects with Indigenous proponents. So let's go back to thinking about those actual proponents and not kind of this legislation.
The idea behind this is kind of, okay, if we're going to charge ahead with these mega projects and get stuff done, and to Mark's point, maybe even break a few things, there's kind of this implicit notion of a coalition of the willing. We'll find the people who are ready to go ahead on this. But again, the fundamental problem, maybe you have a view on this, Mark, is if you have a coalition of the willing to do a pipeline or a maker project, they might not all be in a row. And then you've got problems with, Indigenous groups in this area saying yes and others saying no, or a province signing on and then the next one not. Even getting from Alberta and Saskatchewan to Ontario, you're still going through Manitoba, right? Never mind Quebec. So can a coalition of the willing approach work?
Yeah, and I'll just, to answer your first question, is there a veto? There isn't. And this is very clear in Canadian law. Now there is FPEC, and there is an expectation of free, prior, informed consent. And that is the goal for every proponent and for every project. You want to achieve that consent, but it is not a requirement. And as you say, on linear infrastructure, when there could be dozens of nations, you could see why that would be an issue. We don't require consensus for anything, even changing the constitution in this country. But there's so much jurisprudence that we got out of Trans Mountain on these exact same issues. So the courts have been clear. We have pretty good line of sight on what is required. There must be a duty to consult and accommodate. The Crown must act in good faith to accommodate all those impacts on Aboriginal treaty and inherent rights. And we have a pretty good idea of what that means. On the other side, for Indigenous groups, there is a reciprocal duty. That is the language, a reciprocal duty to also act in good faith, to also propose actual solutions when your rights are infringed upon. What are solutions that could accommodate that impact on your Aboriginal inherent rights? So this isn't, we've had 20 years to sort through this. C5 doesn't take us back to 1982 or to 1930 or any of those things. That still exists. And again, for those who are willing to act in good faith and looking for solutions and looking to align interests, this is a tremendous opportunity. For those that feel the reaction is to stop it, it will be a tough hope.
So, Mark, I just want to come to you on this, let's break stuff, which sort of the
stuff. I didn't mean everything.
No, I understand it. And I think we've seen that in the tech sector, and we've seen this some other places. The idea of coalitions of willing and trying to get ahead. I know you're very optimistic about things, but boy, in Canada, it seems that everybody has to put their hand up before any politician dares move forward.
Yeah, well, look, we can't put the genie back in the bottle, and I think Heather's done a great job of laying out a lot of the legal frameworks and even some of the history of how we got where we are. And so, it's a matter of how do we move forward? And yes, we are all about consensus in this country, and I understand, and I am not cynical in that regard. But the challenge we have here is that, we've got some existential problems. And so, I'm not sure the dilution of authority has necessarily or is necessarily as helpful as it could be in this situation. And, if everything ends up deferring to the courts, then, are we really capable of moving forward? And so, look, I don't have an answer to this.
Yeah.
This is kind of a classic Canadian situation. We are the architects of the circumstances that we find ourselves in. We either accept and agree as a community of communities that we've got some really significant problems here. The challenge is that not everybody agrees on the problems.
Yeah.
And not everybody agrees on the risks. And not everybody sees it from a shared perspective. And so what you have here are overlapping interests where they are overlapping. In a lot of cases, they don't overlap at all. But so this is why we end up pursuing, and this is the challenge, the path of least resistance ends up being, unfortunately, a compromise. And it's not necessarily in the best interest of the nation in its entirety, but it's in the best interest of all of the interests. And so there is no silver bullet to this.
Yeah.
But there are some executive authorities, and I know that this is scary stuff, and I know that this is a political, landmine. But ultimately, I think there's some things that can be done. But I'm not an expert. But we've got to move forward here.
I want to go to Margaret on some of the, like, going forward, because we do always say, well, or things always seem to end up in the courts. We keep saying, you guys get to be the final arbiter of these things, and then that takes 5 years, and by that point the government has changed and nothing happens. So two things to you, Margaret, about the system, that whole relationship with, I don't know whether politicians are kind of throwing up their hands and handing it off to the courts. The other thing is that we see the Prime Minister dealing directly with the premiers and the Indigenous groups. But most of these deals, any kind of deal, even the free trade agreement, does have to be ratified by Parliament. And eventually he's going to have to be going back into that system as well.
Well, that's right. And you know, I've been really disappointed that when we've got such a big economic and trade agenda and big issues and big opportunities, as we've been discussing, Parliament's not been meeting. And it's true that the Prime Minister and Cabinet have been barreling ahead and lots of trade discussions in Washington. But, you know, it would be great if we had Parliament's input throughout this period. And we're going to get into the fall and immediately have a budget, hopefully immediately, because we haven't had one for a while. And we need one. We need that kind of broad set of priorities. And so, you know, it's been too bad that we haven't had that parliamentary engagement and parliamentary committees, you know, engaging on what we see as a country. And I think there's a lot of unity right now in the country to be top economic priorities.
Well, it also offers a process. I mean, that's the other thing. Certainly the Senate does it, but the House does it as well. It has a committee process. So it does give voice to people who feel that they are not being heard by the Prime Minister or the oil and gas companies or whatever it is. That is part of the job of Parliament, to give voice to those. And when Parliament doesn't sit, that cuts off a whole avenue of conversation and sometimes just venting, which makes people feel better.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Again, about you, I don't want to spend all our time on this, but there's just so many interesting connectors, because in the context of all this, these trade negotiations going on at various different levels, the president was at a conference last week where I think it was $90 billion was put on the table from investors willing to repatriate the American economy and saying, yes, we're going to build our plants there and we're going to have all these manufacturing things. And Heather, you reposted something on X the other night, an interesting piece about we are so risk averse here. And that sends people fleeing to the United States, whether it's Donald Trump attracting them or not. They're not staying here for the variety of reasons.
Yeah, well, it's been a very difficult place to put your capital in because your returns, it takes a long time to get a return. There's a lot of regulatory uncertainty. We talk about the pancake stack of regulations. It's hard to assess what the risk is, what the return will be through all that stack. And so capital, especially, in oil and gas and the energy sector and resource, have been looking to the United States. And some of our, biggest and best companies, regularly spend 80% of their capital expenditures in the United States, or even Mexico, rather than spend it here. And it's the article in The Logic by Kevin Carmichael that kind of touches on that. Yeah. So, we focus on the tariffs and Trump giveth and he taketh away. He's obviously created uncertainty in the United States as well. And we focus on the tariffs. And I think broadly, any economist will say this is not, good for attracting investments in the United States. But at the same time, reducing taxes, reducing the regulatory barrier. These are things that we just need to compete with in Canada, where obviously we share a continent, we share markets. If we cannot compete with the United States, and the capital just will not come here, and it has not come here. And we've seen great disparities in our capital inflows and capital outflows. So this is something that I do believe Prime Minister Carney would understand, and hopefully has a view to how he's going to level out this playing field. But number one, and coming to all say this, is the regulatory risk. Again, that's our own goal in our own way, would cost no money, in fact, would save us money to streamline, these regulations that we've imposed on ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. Margaret, you must have fallen off your chair when you saw a recent editorial in the Globe and Mail saying, oh, well, never mind trading with the US. We'll just put our eggs in the China basket. Who was thinking what at the Globe and Mail?
Well, yes, that's really a surprising take on our current situation, that we should abandon our newly erratic partner for our even more erratic trading.
And dangerous.
And our companies have really been subjected to terrible treatment in China. I've done a lot of work on our technology joint ventures in China, and some of our companies have just left and abandoned their factories there, left the technology with the Chinese, because they are taken to the cleaners. We've seen the retribution against canola, pork, seafood, other products where China has the flexibility of substituting their own products for ours. And that leaves us exposed. And so I think to the extent possible, we should be doing less in those areas where we're exposed to this kind of erratic trade behavior by China, and diversify to other countries in the Indo-Pacific. And the government has said that it's going to have a new trade diversification strategy. I think that's right. They need to double down on the Indo-Pacific strategy and open up not just to our like-minded partners, which is the first reflex. Sure, we can do more with Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, but we should also be looking at deepening our trade relations with Vietnam, Thailand, other countries where we have common interests, and they need our products, and we need theirs. And so, the issues with China of national security, economic security, transnational repression, those problems haven't gone away. They're in fact getting worse. If you pay attention to what's going on in China now, they're doubling down on this kind of retrogressive behavior, and we see that there are internal economic problems in China, which again says, let's not tether ourselves to that economy if it's having significant problems. Xi Jinping did not show up at the meeting of BRICS, the big annual meeting of the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. He sent his premier. So there are some, waves happening in terms of leadership there, that are, not easy for Westerners to read, but there are signals when he disappears for 2 weeks and so on, that there are issues. So, we need to focus on the Indo-Pacific, but not attach ourselves to China particularly.
Right. Yeah, that's a really important distinction, but it raises a question in my mind, Mark, because in the other discussions that particularly around NATO and defense spending, that has refocused us more toward Europe again and our NATO partners there. I know the Indo-Pacific larger Asian question is important for trade, but yet we're back focusing on Europe. Can we do all of the above? Should we really be buying defense equipment from European partners? Should we be signing on to rearm Europe? All of those things. Does that take our focus away and our money away from building those other connections that Margaret's talking about?
Well, short answer, and you know I'm not good at those, is yes, yes and no. But let me unpack it, okay? So, you know, in many respects, we are perhaps a one-trick pony, maybe one and a half tricks, okay? The point I'm making is that we have limited intellectual and bureaucratic bandwidth, and there's a variety of reasons for that. I'm not going to debate it, and so we tend to when we have a new big idea, good idea. Let's assume the big idea is also a good idea. We tend to follow the path of least resistance. Okay, and so it is completely understandable that we would go to something that already exists because we have shared interests. We have shared values, although I'm glad to see that we're starting to put our interests above our values in many of these very pragmatic conversations.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. That may be for a whole other day.
And so I'm all in on the Rearm Europe NATO partnerships for a variety of reasons, and not the least of which is that there's already a lot of pre-existing mechanisms, and the Europeans build a lot of really good kit. However, I agree with you, but I don't think it's intentionally exclusive. And I know that's not what you meant when you asked the question, but I just think it's a function of we only seem to be able to juggle so many balls at a time. And you know, maybe that's fair, but maybe we need to learn or develop the capacity to juggle a few more. And so, you know, I think there are opportunities, particularly with Japan and Korea, on a defense-specific agenda. But to Margaret's point, I think there's a lot of other potential partnerships. And we always forget the I in Indo-Pacific. You know, and there is a huge opportunity, both in terms of providing clean energy, in terms of, you know, doing a whole bunch of things that are potentially in shared interests. And, you know, they are a democracy. And sometimes we may not like certain things about it, but then we don't like certain things about our own democracy. So, you know, there's opportunity there. That's a long answer, which is typical of my answers. But, you know, I think we're on the right track, okay, to summarize. But there be dragons, and there's dragons in all of these issues. And I have a bunch of concerns about the European partnership, not the least of which is capacity. Everybody is rearming, and there is only so much capacity available. And my concern is while we dither, we could end up being on people's waiting lists because you know, other people are jumping to the front of the line and they're getting their orders in before we have the opportunity. I also have concerns about the geographic separation. There used to be some mechanisms, they no longer exist, that were in place to mitigate some of the supply chain challenges of being on the Western Atlantic, because those are real. And I go back to paths of least resistance. If a Canadian supplier wants to be part of rearming Europe as a supplier, and that's another issue, is, you know, it's one thing to talk about consumption. It's another issue to talk about how we participate in the supply chain. There's some significant challenges, and those equate to primarily dollars and schedule. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, and I know, Heather, you were all excited about the first LNG delivery actually making it to the other end from Canada. But again, to Mark's point, this has been 2 or 3 years where our allies have been saying, please help us wean ourselves off Russian energy. and they were told, oh, well, we can't do that, no business case, we don't want to hurt the climate. So we're sending mixed signals too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We've been sending mixed signals, but I mean, this is, unambiguously a positive movement that we're finally amongst the world's LNG exporters. It's been a long time coming, but we finally have some momentum. So LNG Canada is operating. That's fed by Coastal GasLink. Cedar LNG, which is the Haisla majority-owned project with Pembina, will also be fed with Coastal GasLink. So that pipeline's already established. They're going to start construction there. There's been an FID. Woodfibre near Squamish, north of Vancouver, is starting up, is in construction. Now, what is let's continue this momentum. The easiest, lowest hanging fruit for the C5 list or the nation building project list or anything like that is Silicim's LNG. That is led by the NISCA in a consortium with pretty much every major natural gas producer in the country. It is waiting for FID. It is waiting for approval. We could see it in the coming weeks. And if I were them, I would do it. If you're the federal government, this is such low hanging fruit to make an announcement. The process has already gone through. BC is supportive. There is already, people don't appreciate this, an approved pipeline in BC, the Prince Rupert gas transmission line, already approved, has been reapproved by BC in the last couple of weeks. That would feed into this project. So there's your nation building project, folks, to get off the ground and start making this list to go.
Yeah. Can I just divert for a moment, because when we were discussing what our role is to helping allies, I just want to come back to Ukraine if I can for a moment, because the president says to Putin, okay, I'm really, really mad at you and I'm giving you 50 days to do something and solve this issue. I think we have seen Zelensky reach out to Russia, but there are still kind of two world views, and I'll go to Margaret and then to Mark on this, which is we've kind of got the what the hell are you thinking? Telling them they've got 15 days just puts them on a killing spree, which we've seen, versus, some of the European response, Mark, the NATO response, which is, look, we're making progress and we should be thankful to Trump that he's put the issue on the agenda and is forcing Putin's hand and is helping to rearm again Ukraine. Margaret, where do you think we are on this issue?
Well, I had the same reaction when I heard 50 days, that this is license to have major attacks every single day on Ukraine in Kyiv. And it's tragic for that country. There's been so much effort put into by NATO members into defending Ukraine and helping it stand up to the Russian attacks. But they're getting worse, not better, and Russia is making inroads into the country with the help of Chinese technology, I would add. And there's some suggestion that China doesn't want to see Russia lose Ukraine because that could have some messages about Taiwan. And in fact, it would very much like Russia to take over Ukraine, because that would be an accomplishment for an autocratic country taking over a neighbor. So I'm very concerned, and we need to be doing as much as we can to be helping Ukraine, and at the same time, I understand where the leadership of NATO is coming from in saying, the support from the U.S. is good. They should have set a 5 or 15 day target, not 50 days. But at least the U.S. is still at the table. There was a period of time when we thought they were just going to abandon NATO. And so it's good that Trump is now seized of this issue, but there's always a chance he could walk away.
Yeah. Mark, want to hear you on this.
Yeah, so two macro reactions, one philosophical and one practical. On the philosophical level, I think sadly what we've seen here is President Trump got played by Putin. And
I think even he thinks that.
Yeah, well, yeah, and of course, and that's why he's pissed. To put it
Yeah,
crudely, he's
yeah,
pissed off.
yeah,
He,
absolutely.
I'm not going to debate the merits
Right.
of his thinking, but the reality is that we've now got, for the moment, the president of the United States where he probably should have been from the outset, which is okay. We can't trust this guy, and nobody's arguing with the fundamental principle that this is bad. And to Margaret's point, and it's getting worse. On the practical side of it, the reality on the ground, sadly, is Ukraine cannot continue to sustain this without the support of the West. I am pleased to see the United States change its position on supporting the Ukrainians, notwithstanding why it happened. That's almost irrelevant. And Russia is Russia's running out of gas, and I don't mean that in Heather's
World, yeah.
fossil fuel sense. They're operating on a wartime economy here. There's a lot of discussion by much smarter people than me about how sustainable this really is in the long term. We're seeing numbers around GDP growth and stuff, which I think are fundamentally flawed because the economy might be growing, but it's not growing for the average Russian. And it's only growing because they're spending enormous amounts of money on their war machine. But they don't have the people to sustain this. This is why you've seen a significant transition to technology by the Russians, which is disturbing because it gives them a little more bench strength than they had up to this point. You're seeing, we've got North Korean troops rotating through the front lines.
Yeah.
That
And
should
Chinese technology.
And Chinese technology. So, but I guess the point is, from a Russian perspective, well, kind of what's good for the goose is good for the gander. You guys in your NATO capitals in the West are supporting Zelensky, so I need some support here too. This isn't going to sort itself out, and something's going to have to give. And I commend President Zelensky for reaching out. I do not think it's a sign of weakness. I've seen stuff this morning indicating that. I think that's just totally, I think it's actually a sign of strength and a sign of practicality. But, sadly, I have stopped predicting what may or may not happen, certainly in the short term. But we're on an unsustainable path here.
And can I just add, I think this is giving me an indication that we need to, here in Canada, be spending more of our resources on electronic warfare and R&D. This is an area that's very weak in the Canadian defense establishment, and it's an area where we need to put some renewed focus.
Yeah, and maybe we shouldn't be buying all our equipment from Huawei, but hey, that's a whole other issue. Can I just get from you, because this keeps coming back up in the Canadian context, and it has again, and I was reading, of course, this is on again in the UK. This is completely off everything we've been talking about today. Should 16-year-olds who can't drive a car on their own, who can't buy a drink in a bar, who can't sign up and go to war, who, there's a whole bunch of things you can't do if you're 16, never mind your brain development isn't really complete. Should they be the new voting bloc in either the UK or Canada? We've got legislation to give 16-year-olds the vote. Heather, you're closer to
as
that
the mother, yes, as the mother of a son who will turn 16 in September. He is not qualified to opine on federal politics. I can assure you of that. I still make his lunches, so. So no, there's some kind of gambit, I guess, to get the youth vote, which, certainly in the UK they think would lean towards, towards Labour. So, but is it a good idea? No, I don't think it's a good idea.
Margaret?
I think it's insane. I think we need to be putting more.
Let me just say ditto. Okay, go ahead.
I think we need to be putting more focus on engaging 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds. I like the idea of parties organizing in schools and getting political engagement. I think every parent should take their kids to the voting booth with them when they go, so that the kids can see how this is done and understand what voting is about, and that voting is serious and is a right. I mean, just the tangible things like that, so that when they are voting age, they'll have a respect for it and understand, and will educate themselves and talk to their family members about it.
Mark, the final word to you on this.
Oh, the final word. Well,
the final word.
Okay, well, as somebody who spent my entire adult life serving democracy and not necessarily practicing it, okay. I'm always concerned when I see attempts in a variety of different ways to try and manipulate our existing mechanisms for a political advantage. I am not naive in that regard, but we see this playing out. In fact, some of the things we've been discussing today are examples, and that just makes me nervous. And this is where we have a responsibility to protect the democracy that we are so invested in, and not do stupid things because they might have a short-term advantage. And I agree with both of my colleagues in terms of how we can engage youth, but giving youth, a vote in this context, to me, is just fundamentally flawed.
Yeah.
Because of the motive behind it.
That's exactly
my concern. Right?
We've seen it on the immigration file and other things too. So anyway, thank you for that. Thanks for those final comments. Mark Norman, Senior Defense Strategist at Samuel Associates, 40 years of service. Did you sign up when you were 16, or you do
17?
17. You have to wait for that.
I couldn't vote, and I couldn't drink.
But you could pick up a gun.
Well, I could drink, but not legally.
Yes.
But,
No, that is one of the things that's kind of, and it's the argument on the counter side, which is we can ask them to go and serve their country, but they can't vote about whether it's a good idea or not. But interesting point. Heather Exner-Pirot, Senior Fellow and Director of Energy, Natural Resources and the Environment at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And Margaret McCuaig-Johnston, always this long title, but I'm going to just do it once here. Senior Fellow at the Institute for Science, Society and Policy and at the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Ottawa. Okay, I'm out of breath. Thank you all very much. It's great to see you, and we'll convene again as the session in the fall convenes again, and you can all offer your advice to the Prime Minister and the opposition leader if he wins a seat, and take a look at what might be in that budget. Great to see you all.
Thanks so much.
See ya. Talk very soon, and thanks to all of you for joining us today and watching this edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. We'll see you again very soon too.